Does the capacity for cruelty signal increased morality or decreased morality within the individual? That's a deep dive we're going to do today. I'm Carrie Blazer, the Divine Feminine. My soul's name is Sophia. And the main reason I make these videos is to share my free ebook below, my 6 Divine Feminine self-love strategies that will teach you how to transform your emotional wounds into personal wisdom, learning that self-love creates heaven on earth because we live in a holographic universe. And if we live in a holographic universe, what's projected out of our hearts is what creates our reality. That's why self-love, a frequency in our hearts, communicating out through from our soul out through our hearts onto the quantum field, is what creates heaven on earth. And that's why I share those strategies. So I really encourage you to check them out. But today we're going to start with Dr. Jordan Peterson, who does a deep dive into the supposition that someone who's capable of cruelty is then not moral. Or does the capacity for cruelty speak to extended emotional range and not lack of morality? Let's look at that, because I think it's a fascinating question that we deal with today. Let me make it bigger, and then here we go.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of After School. I'm Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Today, we'll be summoning our inner monsters. Without further ado, let's dive in. You know, you might say that someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect, because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous.
Right. And cancel culture is something we can bring in here, is that, canceling what's deemed cruel or immoral, as if cruelty is a part of us that should just be deleted or eradicated. But as we're seeing right here, it's necessary. Carl Jung focuses on wholeness, not perfection. And this is a prime example. How do we create whole human beings with an extensive emotional range? And I'm going to quote the Maori tribe in New Zealand, where the warriors were praised. They go out and be vicious warriors, could say cruelty, and then they get that all out of their system. That's part of their emotional range. And then when they come home, they're soft and gentle and playful with the kids. That's a mature man with self-control who knows exactly when to be cruel to protect his family and when to be soft to love his family. That's a whole human being. Let's look at wholeness, not perfection.
Or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off.
And so our souls plan our lives based on our wounds for self-improvement opportunities. I had a rape wound, so I got raped as a child, as a teenager, to show me that wound. That's how souls operate. When I perceive selfishness outside of myself, that is my soul showing me my own selfishness. But when I turn my wounds into wisdom and I walk with self-confidence, I mean, who's more likely to get raped? A confident woman dressed appropriately, walking in daylight, being appropriately concerned but confident? Or a scared woman at dark, like making inappropriate decisions because she doesn't believe in herself? So is it external authority or is it inner authority that creates wholeness and well-being? And I'm going to argue that it creates inner authority. I mean, Carl Jung, as we can get to in a minute, he did a lot of work talking about projections. We project who we are onto the quantum field so that we can see ourselves. The universe is a mirror. That's why he looked for wholeness and not perfection. Perfection comes out of the brain when the heart is shut down. No one's perfect. Since we're souls having a human experience, and our souls plan our lives based on our wounds for self-improvement opportunities, then the presupposition in that is that no one's perfect. So why seek it? Is that mentally healthy, or does that signify mental illness? Lack of understanding of reality.
And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt, because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was, it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, of the sorts of terrible atrocities that characterized, let's say, the 20th century.
A famous Carl Jung quote is, "One does not become enlightened by imagining beings of light, but by making their darkness conscious." Darkness is the shadow, our subconscious. Like my darkness, I used to have fear all men in my shadow and my subconscious. That drove a ton of anxiety because my soul, my energy body, communicating out through my heart, the nervous system in our heart is far more complex than our brain, and our heart sends 90% more signals to our brain than the other way around. But when fear is in my soul, my energy field that comes out through my heart and is communicated to my brain overproduces cortisol. Well, then what happens? Well, when a body overproduces cortisol, the sugar in the blood system is inappropriately raised for an extended period of time, driving inflammation. I think it's like 90% of our diseases are caused by inflammation. And the field of epigenetics has proven that less than 1% of our diseases come from our genetics. So we want to be healthy, we need to love ourselves. That's why self-love creates heaven on earth. Why heaven is a frequency in our hearts we project in the holographic universe that we live within. And when in Carl Jung's work on projection mirrors that exact thing. And we're going to get to a Carl Jung quote after this. We'll go right to that.
And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims. Let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a
Right, but it's not. When I experienced
wisdom,
enlightenment the first time, it was 3 days. It was super intense. I was in perfect shape, but I was vibrating so high, I lost 12 pounds. I was so discombobulated from the wisdom I received and the fears, the catastrophic fears that I faced that were not grounded in reality. But I was so discombobulated, I actually called the police on my ex-husband. And then I had talked to the police the next day and go to the doctor. My family wanted to put me in a mental institution because they thought I was just crazy. But I didn't go there. And after I processed all those fears, I started experiencing enlightenment all the time. So I could say yes to what he just said. This is my exact experience. In a Western culture, we don't know that enlightenment is an emotion. I have a master's degree in East Asian religious studies. I've lived in Chinese Buddhist monasteries, and no one ever taught me that enlightenment is an emotion. So that's female work, the emotional center. Not that men can experience enlightenment. Of course they can. But this is feminine work, enlightenment. Maybe that's why Christianity shut women's mouths down. Prioritize humility over enlightenment, external control over internal authority. Internal authority creates whole, healthy human beings. External control creates servants, victims, people who are emotionally repressed.
It's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. And everyone has that there's this old story in King Arthur where the knights go off to look for the Holy Grail, which is either the cup that Christ drank out of at the Last Supper or the cup into which the blood that gushed from his side was poured when he was crucified. The stories vary, but it's basically a holy object, like the phoenix in some sense, that's a representation of transformation. So it's an ideal. And so King Arthur's knights, who sit at a round table because they're all roughly equal, go off to find the most valuable thing. And where do you look for the most valuable thing when you don't know where it is?
I'm the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene. It's been argued that Mary Magdalene is the Holy Grail. But at that time, femininity was not respected as much as masculinity. So how can they send knights off to find the Holy Grail when they were looking for a woman? Creation is the Holy Grail. Blood is feminine. Just saying.
Well, each of the knights looks at the forest surrounding the castle and enters the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And that's a good thing to understand, because the gateway to wisdom and the gateway to the development of personality, which is exactly the same thing, is precisely through the portal that you do not want to climb through. And the reason for that's actually quite technical. This is a Jungian presupposition too, is that, well, there's a bunch of things about you that are underdeveloped, and a lot of those things are because there's things you've avoided looking at because you don't want to look at them, and there's parts of you you've avoided developing because it's hard for you to develop those parts. And so it's by virtual necessity that what you need is where you don't want to look, because that's where you've kept it. And so when you see these stories of the hero, journeying to unknown lands of terror and danger,
that's a self-exploration. Self-reflection is feminine. It
happens to you all the time.
Feminine is chaos. Feminine is nature. Do men know how to lead women in 2026? Do women understand themselves in 2026? I would say in general, no. So we're still figuring out what are men and what are women, and we think we're technologically advanced.
You're in this little safe space like the Hobbit in the Shire, and then there's a great evil brewing somewhere, and you can no longer ignore it, so off you go into the land of terror and uncertainty. And better to go on purpose than accidentally, that's for sure, because at least you can be prepared. And we also know that if you're going to face a threat, if you face it voluntarily, what happens is your body activates itself for exploration and mastery. But if you face it involuntarily, same size threat, then you revert to prey mode, and you're frozen, and that's way more stressful. It's way harder on your body. And so it's better to keep your eye open and watch for emergent threats, because you all know, what you're not doing quite right and where your life is likely to unravel. You all have a sense of that, and the best thing to do is to not ignore that, to pay attention to it, to watch it, and to take corrective action early. And then, you stay on top of things, and your little trip to the underworld might be a few minutes long instead of a catastrophe that produces post-traumatic stress disorder, knocks you out for 4 or 5 years, and maybe you never recover. So one of the things you need to do if you're going to be a human being is to prepare yourself to be useful in the face of death. And so when you have a parent that dies, which shatters people's ideas, often they can't even think about it. If you can't even think about that,
so if you
man,
can't
you've got some
engage in
thinking to do,
cruelty, you can't
because
handle
you need to
cruelty. Death of a parent is cruel, and I know this. I mean, in some ways cruel, in some ways not. My mom passed away on my 45th birthday. That's the beginning of my book, My Inner Heroine, Exploring Feminine Pain, linked below. I had taken care of her for 3 weeks. She had encephalopathy from alcoholism. She was no longer able to swallow, and that never comes back once it's gone. And she didn't want tubes. So I honored all that. And I had to fight a lot of people and draw a lot of boundaries. And her brother was very unhappy with me. So I was easily perceived as cruel. Was I cruel? Or is cruelty based on a perspective? According to my mom, her soul came right to me after she passed because the hospital called and thanked me for everything that I'd done, that I'd honored her. I'd brought her back from Florida to California. She had seen her grandchildren. She had seen they never got married, but I call him my stepfather, my brother too. She saw everybody. And it wasn't easy to bring her back. She actually, she was so stressed out at the end of the plane ride, started eating the seat buckle, and she pooped in her diaper. And I couldn't carry her. I mean, it was gnarly, gnarly, gnarly. And I was, not always nice to people along the way, but I had to draw those boundaries with people. And the capacity to not be nice, to prioritize myself and my mother, to draw those healthy boundaries, to not overgive of myself to people who aren't in my family was, necessary. And my capacity for cruelty fueled my capacity to protect and care for my mother.
be able to at least think about that, because otherwise you're just going to be a wasteland when it happens. And you never know, you could even have a higher ambition. Maybe you could even be useful when it happens, instead of being part of the heap of destroyed people who also have to be taken care of. And that's brutal. You have to be brutal to be useful in the aftermath of your parents' death. You don't get to crumble and fall apart, and no, you have every reason to. So you got to be kind of some tough monster to manage that. But do you want to be useful in the face of tragedy, or do you want to be pathetic? Well, you make your choice.
Oh, I love that. Right. A good man is a very dangerous man who has the capacity to protect him and his own. Like my kids, I armed my kids. My son, by the time he was 18, Eagle Scout, second-degree black belt in Taekwondo, even though he had mild autism and went to a special needs school for the last couple of years of high school because it was just so challenging for him. But he's that competent. And yes, he had a traumatic childhood because I hadn't healed yet. And his sisters both have a red belt, which is one below a black belt in Taekwondo, so they can protect themselves. This is good parenting. This creates healthy people. So if you have a group of men who are all black belts in Taekwondo, do you think they're having civil discussion or they're having chaotic fights? I'd argue they're having civil discussion. Because that's man's work, for them to build themselves so that they can protect if necessary and keep that up is, why men want friendships. I mean, why would a man want another man in his friend group that can't have his back? But a man who's a black belt in Taekwondo is an excellent friend. But he knows he's an excellent friend, so he knows the kind of friendships he can attract into his life. So why would he tolerate someone who can't protect himself? So now he's overburdened by his friend's inability and lack of hard work to protect himself. So I would encourage all men to learn martial arts, not so that they can get in fights, just so they can build the best version of themselves. And so everybody know, hey, my family's safe. Everyone's family's safe. Everyone, oh, cool, let's hang out. Everyone's safe. We all got each other's back. Cool. That's chill. That's peace to a man. I encourage that. But let's look at Carl Jung a little bit deeper, because his thing on projection and, cruelty, and in my book, I think you'll understand why I'm sharing. Okay. My book starts when my mom passed away on my 45th birthday, but it quickly goes to 7 years ago when I attempted suicide. My youngest daughter has an eating disorder. And during the first therapy visit, she blamed me for her eating disorder. On the way home, everything got super dark. And when I got home, my brain told me my children would be better off with a dead mother than a live one. So I attempted suicide. Then I healed after that, because obviously I made it. I attempted. I was luckily not successful. And I started attracting men into my life to mirror my wounds back to me. The universe is a mirror. Well, the second and third heroes in my book are Justin Waller and Andrew Tate. Now, I'm sure a lot of people would perceive Andrew Tate as cruel, but that's your decision to make. Why is he in my life? Well, I have a rape wound. I'm just going to leave it at that. I put my man from my childhood, who's currently the head of global security at GoDaddy, former FBI, in a lineup with Andrew Tate. So first there was Tim. He's my first hero. Then Justin and Andrew. Then 2 decorated fire academy instructors who I met at yoga. And then led me back to JC from my childhood. So I put them all, the fire department, the FBI, and executives, in a lineup with Andrew Tate so they could see themselves. And so let's read what projection is according to Carl Jung. If you imagine someone who is brave enough to withdraw all of his projections, then you might get an individual who is conscious of a pretty thick shadow. Such a man has saddled himself with new problems and conflicts. He has become a serious problem to himself, as he is now unable to say, they do this or that. They are wrong and they must be fought against. Such a man knows that whatever is wrong with the world is in himself. And if he only learns to deal with his own shadow, he has done something real for the world. He has succeeded in shouldering at least an infinitesimal part of the gigantic unsolved social problems of our day. So when do we learn to deal with our own shadow, with ourselves? Well, I'm going to bring up another Carl Jung quote, as we have here, and Dr. Gabor Mate, who specializes in family medicine, and he specializes in how childhood trauma impacts adults. So I'm going to read the Carl Jung quote, and then we'll watch his video. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself, or from holding certain views that others find inadmissible. So let's learn about what creates loneliness in kids. And we're having a loneliness epidemic.
What happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity? In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. And what does the child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are.
Let's look at how I felt. I have a great picture of exactly how I felt on my website, because I had that exact childhood. I was not allowed to be authentic. And so I was suppressed. Carrie, don't say this, don't say that. I internalized that I'm the problem. In general, I'm the problem. Didn't you know creation is the problem? Femininity is the problem. So let me bring up this picture. Okay, let me share, and I'll share. You can see on my website, this is where I go over all the signs and synchronicities that my soul is the same soul as Mary Magdalene, the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, which I only accepted a year ago, less than a year ago in 2025. Okay, there I was at 5 years old when I met JC. Yeah, it was cute. I was a little blonde girl, he's a little blonde boy, we were cute. Okay, here is the picture I want to share. This statue is a statue of a grieving parent. When I started resonating with this statue over a year ago, I hadn't yet fully accepted that I was a grieving parent, that I was raped and had forced abortions, but it's on here. That's how I felt. My whole heart, I rejected my whole heart, my whole inside. I didn't have anything left to connect with, which is why I had so many problems having friends, maintaining relationships. I didn't know how to forgive myself or others. I didn't know how to be a healthy feminine woman. I was stuck in my left brain protecting myself. And I didn't know in my shadow, in my subconscious, I had a fear of all men that I only found when I was 51 years old. So if you feel like that there's nothing left to connect with, then my free ebook below will really help you. Will really help you learn how to process your emotional wounds and turn them into personal wisdom. And there's 6, let me bring it up. I'll bring up my free ebook. We'll go over it. Here it is. Okay. All right, let me share my screen. My daughter took all my pictures. So here we go, my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies. And we'll read the introduction. I explain these techniques in 6 simple lessons, supported by the laws of physics and physiology. I take a multidisciplinary approach to healing as men and women respond to knowledge and wisdom differently. Also, when something is true, it is true in multiple places. These pieces of wisdom and knowledge will help you become more aligned with self-love as we create heaven on earth together. Appreciate, learn, and forgive equals ego death. This will teach you that be grateful for your challenges, because that's how you have room for improvement, and your soul plans your life based on your wounds for self-improvement opportunities. Oh, I've acknowledged a wound. I can extract some wisdom and knowledge out of it. Then once you've opened your heart with gratitude, which will lessen your cortisol and make you more emotionally balanced, regulate your nervous system. Now that you feel safe in a regulated nervous system, it's a perfect time to self-reflect. Why was that event necessary? Like, why was it necessary for me to attempt suicide? Please show me this wisdom. Why was it challenging? There's some questions here, but you can also grab my book that's linked below. It's $2.99 for electronic copy. And you can, get access to more questions on how to self-reflect. And you can, Google it too, self-reflection questions, okay? But here's the love hierarchy. And what I realized is that I was working from an inverted love hierarchy, and I was codependent, and I was putting community before myself. But what happens when I put self-love first? And by self-love, I mean healthy diet, healthy exercise, healthy rest, self-care. Is that when I fill my own cup first and then I create overflow, and when I pour onto others from the overflow, that's how I can pay it forward. And I can always be ready to pay it forward when my soul guides me. When I constantly create overflow. Then from the overflow, first I pour into my spouse. And then we create a healthy relationship. Then when we both have enough overflow, then there's the kids. I'm talking in a healthy relationship, right? And so the kids, they're not going to be home with you forever. That's why the spouse relationship comes first. Then family love, then community love. But when we task kids with social activism at 5 years old, and you see 5-year-olds going out and protesting ICE, and we're giving 5-year-olds a job to confront the federal government, does that sound like a healthy use of children's time? Are they learning to become more emotionally mature adults, or are they being indoctrinated? And then I'll ask this question. Do adults have a right to children, like taking 5-year-olds out to protest ICE? Or do children have a right to healthy adults where children's needs as the most vulnerable come first? Do 5-year-old children have a need to protest ICE? I'll let you answer that question. Okay, next, learn to surf the waves of life is learn how to process your emotions. And I have a physics experiment here for you to check out. Map of consciousness explains that here, explains all of our emotions. The universe is a mirror. This is really great. And it has the physics experiment that can explain it to you. That when I perceive selfishness in someone else, that is my soul showing me my own selfishness. We live in a holographic universe. Changing the world is an inside job. Well, we live in a holographic universe, so how do you change the holograms? You change the projection, like Carl Jung was saying. I have an Andrew Tate got a story here you can check out. Pain is an initiation process to personal growth. Yes. Pain is not a punishment. Pain is how we grow. Because pain is beautiful because it reveals what longs to be healed. I received that wisdom about 33 years into my debilitating lower back pain, which was my lower back and my womb screaming at me to heal from all the pain that it was in. Anyway, please like and subscribe. I hope this was useful. Take care. Bye.